Wyoming Territory, August 1883. The train hissed and groaned as it pulled away from the dusty platform in the town of Dry Creek, leaving behind a single figure standing still among the swirling grit. Kathleen Whitlow clutched her carpet-bag tighter and looked once more up and down the empty street, her stomach tight with dread. No one had come for her. The telegram had been clear. "We'll meet you at the station. Thomas Harland." She had read it over 100 times during the long journey from Missouri, heart full of hope, hands trembling with the weight of her future. But now, the platform was empty. The sun beat down on the wooden planks, and her pale blue dress was already gathering dust at the hem. Someone coughed nearby, a wiry boy leading a mule, but no one looked her way. No man stepped forward. No voice called her name. She lifted her chin and walked off the platform, her boots stiff from the ride, her eyes scanning the road. The town was small, just a few buildings, a saloon, a post office, and a general store. Wind tugged at her bonnet. She stood there alone, facing the hard truth. She had been abandoned. The saloon doors creaked open, and a man stumbled out, clearly not Thomas Harland. Kathleen's fingers gripped the handle of her bag tighter. She walked to the general store, the bell above the door jingling faintly. A woman behind the counter looked up with mild surprise. "You lost, miss? I am looking for Thomas Harland. I'm his. I came from Missouri. He sent for me." The woman's face shifted. "You the bride?" Kathleen nodded slowly. The woman sighed. "Thomas Harland left town 2 weeks ago. Word is he headed north. Claimed he changed his mind." Something inside Kathleen cracked, but she nodded. "Thank you." Outside, the sun was lower now, shadows stretching long across the dry street. She sat on the bench outside the store, her bag beside her, and folded her hands in her lap. Her heart pounded with a slow, heavy ache. She had no money for a return ticket. No family left back home. And now, no husband. She felt the tears sting but refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of strangers. The sun dropped lower, dipping behind the hills, turning the sky gold and copper. As daylight began to fade, a lone rider appeared at the far end of town, his figure outlined against the sunset. He rode slow, like he had nowhere to be, and yet his eyes scanned the street with purpose. Kathleen sat up straighter. The horse was a tall buckskin, and the man in the saddle wore a worn leather coat and a dusty hat pulled low over his brow. He looked like every story she had ever read about the West: rough, silent, steady. He stopped his horse in front of her, dark eyes quiet under the brim. "You the woman come in on the train?" His voice was low and calm. She hesitated. "Yes." He dismounted in one smooth motion. "Name's Lawson Whitmore." She blinked. "Whitmore?" He nodded. "You and I might be kin, but I doubt it. You got left at the station." It wasn't a question. Kathleen looked down, embarrassed. "I did." Lawson glanced at the fading sun, then back at her. "You got anywhere to go?" She shook her head. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached for her bag. "Come on. I got a place west of here. Not much, but it's clean. You can rest." She stood slowly. "Why are you helping me?" He paused. "Because no one else did." They rode quietly through the long stretch of land west of town. The sky was blackening now, stars coming out one by one. The land stretched wide and empty, but not cold. Not with him riding beside her. His cabin sat against a rocky slope, simple but solid. A small barn stood nearby. He helped her down, his hand warm around hers, steady. Inside, the room was tidy. A fire crackled in the hearth, already lit. There was only one chair, one bed, and a cot folded against the wall. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep on the cot." She stepped into the room, heart still buzzing with nerves, but something about the way he moved, careful, respectful, eased the knot in her chest. He poured water from a pitcher into the basin, then set some bread and jerky on the table. "It ain't much, but it'll fill you." She sat slowly. "Thank you, Lawson." He looked at her, quiet again. You do not need to thank me, Kathleen. The way he said her name made her feel seen for the first time in days. She watched him move around the room confident, but never loud. He had a presence that filled the space without trying. After the meal, he unfolded the cot, laid his coat over it, and took a seat by the fire. She stood near the bed, unsure, then said softly, Were you in town earlier? You came late. He looked up. I was up by the North Ridge. Heard about you from the storekeep. You came back just to check on me? He nodded once. She stepped closer. Why? Lawson's eyes met hers. There was no hesitation. Because a woman should not be left standing alone, not in a place like this. Her throat tightened. I thought I was going to marry a man who wanted me. You still might, he said, voice low. Just not the one who sent the telegram. She looked at him, startled. He didn't look away. You came all this way to start over. That takes grit. You deserve better than being forgotten. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers twisting in her lap. What kind of man are you, Lawson? He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. A man who works hard. Keeps to himself. Spends more time with horses than people. But I know how to treat someone right, if they let me. She swallowed hard. You do not even know me. I am not trying to take anything from you. I am just saying. If you stay, you will not be alone. Her eyes stung again, but this time she let the tears fall. Quiet once. She turned her face away, but Lawson stood and crossed to her, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. I lost someone too, he said gently. Years back. I know what it feels like to have the world shift under your feet. She looked at him. Did you love her? He nodded once. But that was a long time ago. The heart. It can heal. She reached for his hand. He let her. And in that quiet room, with the fire casting soft shadows on the walls, Kathleen Whitlow knew she had not come all this way for nothing. She had come to find the right man. And he had come at sunset. Kathleen woke to the scent of wood smoke, and the steady sound of something being chopped outside. The room held the hush of early morning, gray light filtering through the single window. She sat up slowly, the unfamiliar mattress creaking beneath her. A folded quilt covered her, one she hadn't noticed the night before, stitched by hand, uneven in places but warm. Outside, the dull rhythm of an axe kept time against the tree line. She moved to the window and saw Lawson at work, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his coat slung over a fence post. The wind stirred his shirt against his back, and each swing of the axe was sure and patient, like there'd never been a rush in him. She tightened the laces of her boots, washed her face at the basin, and stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind her. You always split wood before breakfast? She asked quietly, not wanting to startle him. He paused mid-swing, glanced her way. Only when I need to think. What's the thinking about? He set the axe down into the stump and wiped his brow with the inside of his arm. Was wondering if you'd want to help with the fence today. Some rails came loose after the last wind. She nodded. I can help. He looked at her then, really looked, like he hadn't expected that answer. You ever worked a fence before? No, she said. But I've stitched seams crooked and boiled water over open fire. I can learn. They ate quietly cornmeal mush and strong coffee. Lawson moved without wasted motion, and she watched how he folded everything back into place when they finished, like the smallest tasks had worth. By mid-morning, they were walking the eastern stretch of the fence, the sun warm but not yet harsh. He showed her how to brace the rails with a shoulder while hammering the nails in slantwise. She held the rails steady, dirt streaking her skirt. He didn't correct her once. Where did you learn to build like this? She asked, pressing a nail into a post. My father, he said. When he wasn't drinking. She waited, but he didn't offer more. Instead, he pointed to a spot where the wire had loosened. She held it while he wrapped the wire taut with calloused fingers. I used to think I'd live in a town, she said after a while. With a porch and neighbors close by. Maybe teach school. You still could. She shook her head. Not much need for schoolteachers out here. Lawson leaned on the fence rail, looking out toward the dry hills. There's a schoolhouse west, near Sweetwater. Just one room, but it stands. Sometimes they bring in a teacher when the weather holds. She followed his gaze. How far? 2 days on horseback. Too far to go unless you're set on it. I'm not set on anything anymore, she said. He didn't answer that. Instead, he walked ahead, checking posts. She followed, brushing splinters from her fingers. By late afternoon, Kathleen's arms ached, and her palms itched with blisters. They sat on the porch steps, sharing a tin cup of cool water from the well. A hawk circled high above the fields, gliding easy in the sky. You ever thought about leaving this place? She asked. I did once, he said. Rode south as far as Santa Fe. Worked with a trail crew moving cattle. Long days, short tempers. Nights were worse. What brought you back? He tilted his head. I miss quiet. Miss land that didn't crowd me. She looked down at her hands, thumbed the edge of her torn glove. I didn't think I'd miss Missouri. But I do in a way. Not the people. Just the knowing of it. The way you know a room you've sat in too long. He nodded. Place leaves its mark. Evening settled in soft. The shadows stretched, and the air cooled. Lawson lit the lantern inside, and she watched him from the doorway as he checked the flame, careful not to let it sputter. I could cook something, she offered. If you've got flour. He nodded toward the cupboard. There's some. Bacon, too. She moved to the small stove, stoked the coals, and set a skillet over the heat. Bacon sizzled while she stirred flour into water, forming rough biscuits. He stayed quiet, just watching the firelight flicker against the walls. When they sat down to eat, he passed her the plate first. These are good, he said, mouth full. She smiled faintly. They're tough. Then so are we. After they finished, she stood by the window, arms crossed loosely. The world outside was still, save for the wind brushing the grass. Lawson stood behind her, not close, but near enough she could feel the quiet weight of his presence. You planning to stay long? He asked. I don't know. He nodded once. I don't want to be a burden, she added. You're not. She turned toward him. You don't know that yet. His expression didn't change, but something softened in his voice. I know what trouble looks like. And what it doesn't. She looked down at her boots. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. You don't have to know yet. He moved to the door, opened it to the cool air. Come morning, we'll ride to the ridge. You should see the land from up there. Might help you think clearer. She nodded slowly. All right. He lingered a moment, then tipped his hat slightly. Sleep well. You too, Lawson. The door clicked shut behind him. Alone again in the small room, Kathleen sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the fire's last glow. Her body ached from the day's work, but her mind was quieter than it had been in weeks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, someone had made a space for her. And that, for now, was enough. They rode west at first light. Lawson's mare picked a steady path uphill, and Kathleen followed behind on his spare gelding, a quiet old brown with kind eyes and a gait that didn't jar her too badly. The morning air held a bite, the kind that clung to skin even as the sun cleared the ridge. Grass brushed their boots as they moved higher, the land opening wider with every turn. They didn't speak much. The silence between them had taken on a shape of its own, not empty, not heavy, just something that felt settled. It gave her space to think without crowding her. When they reached the ridge, Lawson dismounted and tied his reins to a low cedar. Kathleen followed suit, her legs stiff from the climb. She stepped up beside him, breath catching. Below them, the valley stretched for miles. Low sagebrush plains, scattered cottonwoods near the creek, and the faint glint of a roof where a neighbor's homestead sat farther west. The sky reached so wide it pressed against the edges of her thoughts, leaving room for something quiet to grow. You built your life here? She asked after a while. He nodded, arms crossed loosely. Started with a tent. Then a lean-to. Took time. Why'd you stay? Lawson's eyes followed the flight of a bird wheeling low across the field. Because I stopped waiting for better. She let that sit for a while, then said, I used to think I had to marry to begin anything. You don't. I know that now, she said, voice low. But I also know I don't want to sit in a room alone the rest of my life, making the best of things I didn't choose. Lawson turned toward her, one brow lifting. You thinking about leaving? I don't know yet. But I'm thinking about what staying could mean. He didn't answer right away. Then, it'd mean work. Long days. Dust in your teeth. Some winters that cut through to bone. And someone to carry the heavy things beside you. Not for you. Beside you. Kathleen looked down at her hands. The blisters were healing over, pink and tender. I never thought I'd feel useful out here. But yesterday, fixing that fence, I didn't feel like a burden. You weren't. She met his gaze. I know. They rode down slow, the sun warming their backs. Midday found them near the creek, where Lawson dismounted and let the horses drink. Kathleen crouched at the edge, dipping her hand into the cool water. There's wild mint near the bend, he said. Grows thick in summer. She followed him through the tall grass, brushing seed heads aside until the scent caught on the wind sharp and clean. The mint grew in clusters, dark green under the sun. She knelt and began pinching stems, careful not to pull roots. Dry it, and it keeps through winter, he said, crouching beside her. Good for your stomach, too. Or headaches. You know plants? He nodded once. Some. Learned from an old Ute woman west of the range. She had stories for everything. Said you could tell how a plant worked by how it tasted. What does mint mean, then? He ran a leaf between his fingers. Means something can be strong, and still give comfort. She looked at him then, eyes narrowing slightly. Was that meant for the plant, or for me? Lawson smiled, faint and crooked. Both, maybe. They gathered the mint in silence after that, hands brushing once, neither of them pulling away. By the time they returned to the cabin, the light had gone soft again. They worked without needing to speak. She hung the mint to dry over the hearth, and he checked the saddle straps, stacking gear with the ease of someone used to solitude. But it wasn't solitude anymore. Not with her there. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind picked up through the trees, Kathleen sat on the floor beside the hearth, legs tucked beneath her, fingers brushing the hem of her skirt. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said, not looking up. Lawson didn't answer right away. She thought maybe he hadn't heard her. But then he set down the tin cup in his hand and leaned back in the chair. When I was 16, I ran off. Thought I'd make my own way. Ended up cold, hungry, and halfway dead in Fort Bridger by spring. Sheriff there found me stealing biscuits. He gave me a job mucking stalls instead of hanging me. What changed after that? I wrote my mother. Told her I wasn't coming home, but I was still breathing. She never wrote back. Kathleen's throat tightened. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but it wasn't careless. Some things don't come back once they're gone. She looked at him, eyes steady. Some things don't have to, if you build new ones. He met her gaze. This time, he didn't look away. You? He asked. What haven't you said? She breathed in slow. I used to pretend I was braver than I was. Wore it like a coat. But when that man didn't come for me, I think I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. Lawson sat forward, elbows on his knees. You didn't fall apart. I almost did. But then you showed up. You held your own, he said. I just gave you a place to stand. The wind rattled the shutters lightly. She stood and crossed the room, stopping in front of him. Her hands were still, but her voice wavered only slightly. I don't want to wait and see what might happen anymore. Not with you. He rose, close enough now she could see the line of his jaw in the firelight, the scar just below his ear. "I'm not a man who makes promises easy," he said. "But if you stay, I'll give you the truth every day. And a home if you want it." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I want something real. I want a life that doesn't leave me behind." "Then stay," he said. She nodded, and he drew her forward, slow and careful. Their foreheads touched. No rush. No grand declarations. Just the kind of closeness that didn't need explaining. Outside, the wind slipped through the trees. Inside, two people stood in the quiet, no longer waiting. The following days passed with a steadiness Kathleen had never known, measured by chores, the heat of the sun on her back, and the quiet presence of Lawson nearby. She rose before dawn now, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The rhythm of the land had taken hold, feeding the livestock, hauling water, keeping the woodpile stacked. Nothing felt small when it was done with purpose. One morning, as she swept out the cabin, Lawson returned from the barn holding a wooden crate with something wrapped in burlap inside. He set it on the table without a word and stepped back. She looked from the bundle to his face. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside were 3 hens, feathers a bit ruffled from the ride, but healthy. "I traded for them yesterday. Neighbors south of the ridge had too many. Figured you might want eggs without having to ask." Kathleen touched one of the birds gently, then looked up. "You brought them all the way back in that crate." "Would have brought more, but the mule only listens to reason half the time." She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "You know, I've never kept hens before. You'll learn. I seem to be doing a lot of that lately." Lawson leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're good at it." She carried the crate out to the side yard, where the old goat pen stood half collapsed. "We'll need to fix this up before they can stay out. I'll fetch the hammer." By midday, they'd rehung the gate and patched the fencing with scrap slats Lawson had stored behind the shed. The work was rough on her hands, but she didn't mind. The hens wandered the yard now, pecking at the dry earth, as if they'd always belonged there. That night, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, Kathleen lingered by the fire while Lawson dipped a whetstone across the blade of his pocket knife. She watched the back and forth motion, steady and sure. "Did you ever think about having a family?" she asked, voice quiet. He didn't look up. "I did." "What kept you from it?" "Didn't trust myself to be soft where it mattered." She folded her hands. "You're not hard. I've seen too many men become less than kind trying to be strong. I didn't want to turn into one of them." "You haven't." He set the knife aside. "What about you? Was marriage always the plan?" "I think I mistook needing someone for needing anyone. It's different now." He stood, crossed the room, and pulled a folded length of canvas from behind the washstand. "What's that?" "Old cot cover. I'll patch it tomorrow." He hesitated. "But I've been thinking. You don't have to sleep alone anymore unless you'd rather." She stood too. "I don't want separate." There was no rush in how he reached for her, no fire. Just the quiet gravity of someone who meant what he offered. She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her ear. When she finally pulled back, she said, "I want to build something here. Not just make do. I want to plant things. Raise animals. I want to belong to the land the way you do. You will. I want to do it with you." He touched her cheek, his thumb warm against her skin. "Then that's what we'll do." That was the first night she shared his bed, not out of obligation, not from need. Just two people who had stopped running, who'd found stillness in each other. The days that followed became the start of a shape they could both recognize. Kathleen began marking time by the weight of the dough in her hands and the smell of rain on distant wind. She cleared a patch of ground behind the cabin, planting seeds Lawson had tucked away in a tin, beans, squash, and late corn. He built her a cold frame for the herbs, using old window glass from a broken wagon. One afternoon, they rode east to the trading post. Kathleen traded her mother's brooch one she'd carried all the way from Missouri for a bolt of cotton and a pair of shears. On the ride back, she held the fabric in her lap, fingers threaded through it like it was already part of her life. At home, she began stitching curtains for the cabin windows, nothing fancy, just enough to soften the light in the evenings. Lawson came in one evening with mud on his boots and paused when he saw the fabric hanging. "Looks like a home now," he said simply. "It is a home." They didn't speak of the man who hadn't come for her. That name never passed between them again. There was no need. The life she was meant to have had found her at last, not through promises, but through slow, steady days and the unspoken things that built between them. One evening, as they sat side by side on the porch, a storm rolled in from the west, wind curling around the eaves. Kathleen leaned her shoulder into his. "Do you think we'll make it through winter?" "I think we'll make it through a lot more than that." She looked out at the darkening sky. "Then let's start planning for spring." He reached over, took her hand, and held it in the quiet, as thunder rolled soft in the distance. Whatever lay ahead, it would be faced together. She wasn't alone anymore. And she never would be again. By late September, the wind turned cooler, and the mornings carried a sharpness that hinted at the first frost. Kathleen had begun rising earlier, pulling on her shawl before stepping outside to check the henhouse. The birds, now used to her voice, clucked softly as she gathered the eggs. She carried them back in a woven basket Lawson had made from willow branches, the handle worn smooth from her fingers. Inside, Lawson was sealing the last of the root cellar shelves with tar pitch, brushing it carefully into the cracks of the wood. He'd scavenged extra boards from a collapsed shed up the ridge and spent the better part of 3 days cutting them to fit. Kathleen set the basket on the table. "We've got more than we can eat. We'll trade the rest," he said, not looking up from his work. "There's still folks needing to store up before the snows come." She brushed hair from her face, her cheeks pink from the wind. "I made a list. Salt, lampwicks, sewing needles. I thought we might ride into town before the road gets too thick with mud." Lawson straightened, wiped the brush clean on a scrap of cloth. "We can go tomorrow. I'll hitch the wagon." She leaned against the counter, watching him. "Do you still go into town much?" "Not unless I need something." "Do they know you there?" He gave a short nod. "Enough to leave me be." Her voice lowered. "Will they leave me be too?" He met her eyes. "You're with me. That settles most things." The next morning, they rode out early, the wagon creaking gently under the weight of goods packed for trade, bundles of dried mint, a sack of potatoes, and the extra eggs wrapped in cloth for the journey. Kathleen wore a wool dress she hadn't touched since Missouri, brushed clean and mended at the hem. Lawson glanced once at her as they passed the first bend in the narrow road. "You look like you'd belong here." She gave a quiet smile. "I feel like I do." Dry Creek was busier than she remembered, more wagons, more people. A new building had gone up beside the post office, and smoke curled from the chimney of the blacksmith's forge. She felt eyes on her as they pulled into the square, but no one said a word. Lawson helped her down and handed her the list. "I'll take care of the feed. You go on." She stepped into the general store and was met by the same woman who told her, weeks ago, that she'd been left behind. The woman's expression shifted when she saw Kathleen, now standing taller, her cheeks sun-touched, her eyes steady. "Back again," the woman said. Kathleen placed the list on the counter. "This time, I'm staying." The woman nodded once, began gathering the items without another word. Outside, as they loaded the last of the goods into the wagon, a man approached shoulder, with a limp and a wiry beard. He tipped his hat toward Kathleen before turning to Lawson. "You selling that mare of yours?" Lawson shook his head. "She stays with me." The man shrugged. "Figured I'd ask. Heard you were keeping company now." Lawson didn't answer that, just secured the last strap on the wagon and climbed up beside Kathleen. As they turned onto the road, she glanced over. "Do you mind that they know?" He kept his eyes on the path. "I told you before. I don't need to be alone." She rested her hand over his on the reins. Neither do I. That night, with the fire low and the smell of wood smoke lingering on their clothes, Kathleen sat at the table, wrapping the last of the dried herbs in cloth. Lawson watched her from the chair, his boots crossed at the ankle, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "I want to marry you," he said plainly. She looked up, startled. "Not because of what happened, or what folks think. Not because you need a place. Just because I want you here. All the way." She stood slowly, the cloth falling from her hands. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that again. I've only said it once in my life," he said. "And I mean it more now than I ever did then." She crossed to him, cupped his face gently. "Then say it once more. For keeps." His voice was low. "Kathleen, will you marry me?" She kissed him, soft and sure. "Yes." Lawson carved a ring from a strip of deer antler, polished until it shone like pearl. They married on a Sunday, with the hills gold behind them and a neighbor's boy reading from a weathered psalm book. She wore a cotton dress the color of riverstone, and he wore his cleanest shirt, collar pressed stiff. They spent the winter close. The snow came heavy in late November, piling against the cabin walls and muffling the world outside. But inside, there was heat and laughter, and the steady pulse of a life being made. By February, Kathleen had cleared a space near the hearth for a cradle she'd built herself, smoothing the corners with sand and patience. Lawson had known before she told him. He'd seen it in the way she moved, slower now, steadier. "You ready for this?" she asked one night, her hands resting over the swell beneath her dress. He reached for her, pulling her close. "I was ready the day you stepped off that train." Their daughter was born in early June, just as the cottonwoods leafed out full and green. They named her Mercy, for the quiet grace that had brought them together. She was strong, with eyes the color of her father's and a cry that filled the valley. Kathleen stood in the doorway one morning, Mercy nestled against her shoulder, the sun rising over the ridge. Lawson was in the field, shirt sleeves rolled, checking the new fence line. He looked up and waved. She waved back, heart full. This was the life she'd come west for, not the one she imagined, but the one she'd built, piece by piece, hand in hand with the man who had chosen her without question. And every morning after that, as the sun spilled over the hills and the wind stirred the grass, she knew she would never stand alone again.